Get ready to step into a world where the unknown lurks in the shadows and the impossible becomes reality. Here, you will hear stories that defy logic, encounters with the unexplained, and mysteries that echo through time. Welcome, but be careful. Some stories are more than just tales. They are still alive. Good evening, Luke and channel listeners. My name is Candace. I am an old subscriber to the channel and have even sent some stories to be read here. I am 34 years old today and still live in a small town forgotten by God in the far south of the country called Kinsale. This happened in 2005. My father worked at a hotel on the outskirts of the city, which is about 30 kilometers from our home. He went back and forth every day driving his old Volkswagen, which was his favorite and something he wouldn't part with for anything. He had the chance to trade that car for a new one, but he never wanted to. I remember him saying, "Where a Corolla goes, my Volkswagen goes too." But sometimes it didn't. The car kept breaking down in the middle of the road, and sometimes it took him hours to get home on a route that normally took about 30 minutes. My father was always very conservative. He wasn't really into or a fan of new technology, and he accepted with great reluctance a cell phone that my brother and I gave him as a gift, because since he always took so long to get home, we were worried at home not knowing if he was okay. I said he was very conservative, but in truth, he was just stubborn. He never answered the cell phone, always leaving it turned off or tossed in the glove compartment. It was rare for us to be able to speak with him. Sometimes when the car broke down and due to the delay, we would call him, it always went to voicemail. He never answered. When he arrived, we would scold him a lot, and he would frown and mutter that he was tinkering with the car's engine and didn't even hear that the phone was ringing. My brother and I began to suspect that he was showing signs of dementia, but it was only a suspicion, since there was no one to convince him to see a doctor. He was 60 years old at that time and didn't take care of his health. It seemed that his life was only that car and his job as a janitor at the inn, where he felt happy because he said that there he met many people. He also said that he hated staying at home, and even on his days off, he would go to work. He was quite a character. My older brother was his son from his first marriage and was 26 years old, engaged, about to get married, and was finishing building a house at the back of our yard. I had just turned 14. In fact, this happened exactly one day after my birthday. I clearly remember that I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned all night in bed. I tried picking up a book to read, but I couldn't concentrate on the reading. I just couldn't sleep at all. In fact, I couldn't even relax my body. With every minute, my head grew heavier, but sleep wouldn't come. I looked at the clock and saw that it was already past 4 in the morning. My heart was racing, and an inexplicable tension took over my body. I felt something strange, as if something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. Then it happened. I remember every detail exactly as if it had just happened. I was still awake when my vision darkened for a moment. My body remained in bed, but my mind seemed to have been taken elsewhere. Suddenly, I was on a deserted road, lit only by the headlights of a car. The asphalt was wet, and I could smell the rain mixed with smoke. Inside the car, my father was driving with his hands firmly on the wheel. The radio played a soft song. I could see everything clearly, but I knew that I wasn't there physically. It was as if I were just observing, unable to do anything. It was then that I saw the lights of a truck appearing too fast. My chest tightened, and a fear that wasn't mine took hold of me. My father turned his head to the side, startled, but he didn't have time to react. The impact happened with a loud crash. The car spun, the glass shattered, and everything turned into a blur. My friends, I felt a shock run through my body as if I were inside it. My heart raced, and I felt a tremor take over me. 1 second later, I was back in my room, sitting on the bed, breathing heavily. My hands were trembling and I couldn't move. That wasn't a dream. I hadn't slept. It was as if my mind had seen something that hadn't happened yet. I had felt premonitions before, but never like this. Never with such intensity. My entire body was tense, as if I were still carrying the sensation of that impact. The vision was so real that I could hear the sound of shattering glass. I wanted to believe it was only my imagination, but I knew it wasn't. I stayed there, trying to calm my breathing. My legs were weak, and a strange weight pressed on my chest. I thought about calling my brother, who was sleeping in the next room, but I didn't know how to explain. How could I say I had seen something that hadn't happened yet? I spent the rest of the night awake, waiting for any sound that would prove everything was all right. But the fear lingered, along with the feeling that I knew something no one else did. Then I jumped out of bed and ran to my father's room, but he was no longer there. I knew it wasn't yet time for him to leave for work, so I ran to the kitchen and saw that a glass and a butter-stained knife were in the sink. He had already had breakfast and was no longer at home. As I tried to understand why he had left early, I heard the sound of the Beetle's engines starting. As I fumbled for the key to open the door and follow him, I saw him speed away in the car. He was already turning the corner by the time I reached the gate. I shouted, waved my arms, but he didn't see me. Later, I found out that the owner of the inn had asked him to arrive an hour earlier to repair a section of the game room's plaster that had fallen. Luke, my first reaction was to grab my cell phone and call him. The call went straight to voicemail. I ran and woke my brother, and still very nervous, I told him what I had seen, but he just laughed and didn't believe me. While he was getting ready for work, I said I would stay home, but he insisted that I go to school. He was the one who took care of me since my father was away almost all day. With nothing else to do, I got ready and went to school, trying to convince myself that it had only been a dream. A very strange, distressing dream, but just a dream. But the hours passed and that feeling wouldn't go away. I simply can't remember to this day a single word of what the teachers said. In my mind, there was only a fog, an obsessive thought that the sight of my father in the car turning the corner would be the last time I saw him alive. I recalled the last sentence I had heard from his mouth before going to bed, which was, "Turn off that light, Miss Candace." It wasn't anything poetic or special. It was just a normal phrase a father says to his child. I began to cry when I realized that this sentence would be imprinted in my memory as the last thing my father ever said to me. Then I think I had a drop in blood pressure or something like that. I got up to leave the room, but I couldn't even reach the door and fell, sitting on the floor. As they carried me to the teacher's lounge, I remember, and don't ask me why, a sort of snapshot of that moment was etched in my mind. There was a hose in the yard that seemed much greener than usual, and its color faded as dark clouds began to take over the sky. Before I reached the room, I began to feel the first droplets falling on my face. The principal kept asking me what I was feeling, but I couldn't speak, I couldn't even think straight, and all I did was cry. Inside, my soul was screaming, but not a single word came from my lips. She herself took me home after I had calmed down. I told her that my father was home, but that was a lie. I sat on the living room sofa and picked up the phone to call my father, but there was nothing, only voicemail. My friends, my agony was so immense that I couldn't stay still. I felt like screaming, running out, doing something to make that anguish go away. I remember calling every 5 minutes, but my father simply didn't answer. Then, in my desperation, I had the idea to call his work, an obvious thought that hadn't even occurred to me until that moment. "Hello, this is Candace, Christopher's daughter, the janitor. May I speak with him, please? It's urgent." The person who answered asked me to wait a moment, and then returned with a sentence that nearly made me lose my senses again. "Mr. Christopher did not show up for work today. The manager is asking if something happened to him." I slowly lowered my hand and hung up the phone. I sat on the sofa with my heart nearly bursting from my throat. Then my cell phone started to vibrate. I looked at the screen and there it was. Daddy. I was already imagining hearing a police officer's voice bringing the news I had dreaded when I heard my father's voice. Daughter? Hi, Dad? I replied, relieved yet confused. Where are you? After a brief silence, I heard his voice, half faltering, half lost. I'm here with your mother. Luke, to this day, I can't hold back my tears when I remember that phrase. My mother died when I was 2 years old, and I barely remember her. It even crossed my mind that our suspicion about him suffering from dementia had been confirmed. But before I could answer, he said, No, I know. Daughter, I think I died. I tried to form some sentence to speak to him, but at that moment my mind was an immense, empty desert. I could barely feel my heart beating. Before the call ended, I heard one last phrase from his lips. I love you, daughter. I remained there in the living room, desperate. I screamed so much that I was left voiceless for days. I went days without eating and days without sleeping. The neighbors came to see what had happened, as everyone thought someone was killing me because of the volume and intensity of my screams. Luke, my father's old car, which he loved so much, ended up taking his life. The steering column broke, and he couldn't avoid the truck coming from the opposite direction. Everything happened exactly as I had seen it. I didn't dream. I saw that scene unfold. I still hold in my memory every image, every sound, and every sensation that made that day unforgettable for me. I still can't explain how it could have happened. Perhaps some mysterious force thought I deserved a proper farewell, or that I should have a more tender memory of that man who, even though he wasn't very present at home, was my father, who cared for me and my brother through so much hard work. And it was on the road to work, bringing bread home, that he lost his life. I still live in the same house where I grew up, and I would so love to feel his presence again, but that never happened. I suppose I'm not a medium because otherwise I would have been able to contact him already. I spoke with some people who told me that I had experienced an episode of clairvoyance and that it is perfectly explained by parapsychology. But for me, what I had was a chance to say goodbye to the most important person in my life, and I am very, very grateful for that. Have a great night, everyone, and thank you so much for listening to my story until the end. Good evening, Luke. Good evening, listeners. When I was 16, my best friend, Gary, died in a tragic way. The shock of his departure was overwhelming. Many whispered that we were more than friends, but the truth was that our friendship transcended any label. We were inseparable. We shared secrets, fears, and joys. He knew every detail of my life, just as I knew every detail of his. The idea of moving on without Gary seemed impossible. Even though I was overwhelmed with pain, I made a point of attending the wake and the funeral. I needed to say goodbye. I needed to see that familiar face one last time. However, that turned out to be the worst decision of my life. From that night on, something changed. At first, I thought it was just the result of grief, of an overwhelming longing. But soon I realized there was something more. I felt Gary close by, as if he had never left. Sometimes, as I lay down, I had the strange feeling that someone was there beside my bed, watching me in the darkness. In the early hours of the morning, I heard footsteps in the house, matching mine, even when I was alone. But the worst part was that I could see him. He was always there, standing in the corner of the room, with his hazy, motionless silhouette and eyes fixed on me. There was no hatred in his gaze, nor any joy, only sadness, a deep, piercing sadness. I tried to ignore him, tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, but the truth was that his presence was undeniable. I prayed every night and begged him to move on, to find peace, but nothing changed. The room became a cold, suffocating place. Fear began to consume me. The air around me seemed denser, heavier, as if something invisible were always lurking. Time passed, and Gary remained there. Desperate, I sought help from my Aunt Olga, a woman devoted to spiritism and full of wisdom. She received me with a serious look, almost as if she already knew what I was about to say. As soon as I finished my story, she took a deep breath and, with a grave expression, said something that sent shivers down my spine. "You have a gift. You can see the dead." My heart raced. A gift? I didn't want that. I didn't want to see or hear or feel anything beyond the world of the living. But my aunt explained that Gary didn't want to scare me. He needed me. There was something unresolved between us, something he hadn't managed to say while alive. That very night, my aunt went with me to the room and performed a ritual. She closed the curtains, lit candles, and drew symbols on the floor. Her eyes rolled, and she began to murmur words in a language I didn't understand. The atmosphere grew even colder. I felt Gary there more than ever. Suddenly, my aunt let out a trembling sigh and came to herself. Her face was pale, and her expression carried a weight that frightened me. She looked into my eyes and, in an almost compassionate tone, revealed, "He always loved you, but he never had the courage to say it." Luke, those words hit me like a blow. Tears streamed down my face. I had never known, never even suspected. All that remained was an unspoken love, a truth caught between the world of the living and the dead. That night, Gary was gone. His presence vanished, and the icy feeling that had enveloped me dissipated like mist at dawn. All that remained was a deep void, a silence laden with farewell. But my aunt gave me one last warning before she left. Never go to a wake or a funeral again. The dead will always try to communicate with you. Some just want to say goodbye, but others may not be so benevolent. Since then, I avoid funerals. If someone dear passes away, I stand at the door and pray silently. My gift or curse accompanies me, and I know there are things I will never be able to ignore. The world of the living and the world of the dead are not always as separate as we imagine, and I want to keep my distance because I am very content where I am. A big hug to everyone. Hello, Luke and friends. I would prefer that my name not be revealed because some acquaintances of mine follow your channel. When I was a child, I lived in a small town in the interior of Minneapolis with my mother and my grandmother. My mother used to tell me that my father had abandoned her while she was still pregnant, and that, in part, he did so out of fear of my grandmother. According to rumors in town, my grandmother possessed certain gifts or powers that frightened many people, including my own father. In fact, they said she was a woman capable of bringing misfortune to anyone she didn't like, and no one dared to test her. At that time, I did not understand the gravity of these remarks, but over the years I began to notice very strange behaviors in her that made me change my mind. I have no memories of my father, so the little I know about him comes from what my mother told me. For example, she said that my grandmother never accepted him as a son-in-law and forbade him from getting too close to the house. She also warned him that if he continued trying to be part of the family, he might face serious consequences. Although my father was not a superstitious person, he ended up experiencing drastic changes in his health. He began losing hair at an alarming rate, eventually becoming completely bald, and he started to lose weight very noticeably. This happened while my mother was still living with my grandmother and still hoped that my father would take responsibility for me when I was born. But he, growing increasingly frightened, decided to leave before things got worse. My mother took on the responsibility of raising me, and to be honest, she never openly blamed him. She seemed more hurt by my grandmother than by him. As a child, I spent almost all my days under my grandmother's care, since my mother went out to work. My grandmother was never affectionate with me. She gave me food, told me where I could sit, where to sleep, and what little chores I was supposed to do. She did not reprimand me for disobedience, but her look sent chills down my spine. That frightened me more than any shout or punishment. Children my age experienced normal family life. In contrast, I carried the burden of having a grandmother whom many considered a witch or even worse. In town, it was said that she could summon entities and transform into animals. It was said that this had been happening for a long time. At that time, I paid no attention to these rumors because it seemed hard to believe they were true. I saw her as a grumpy, reserved, old woman, but I never imagined that she could do anything supernatural. I thought people were exaggerating, and that her hatred for my father might simply have been a matter of incompatible personalities. As I grew up, my mother started working in a nearby town. She found a job cleaning houses, and sometimes the families she worked for offered her a room to spend the night. Thus, there were weekends when she would come home, but during the rest of the week, I was alone with my grandmother. When I was about 16, I had grown accustomed to this arrangement. I kept my belongings in my room, which was nothing more than a space with a bed and a small window. During one of those weeks when my mother stayed in town, something happened that I could never logically explain. It was a Friday night. I had had a tense day because I had argued with my grandmother about her attitude. I had never felt comfortable shouting at her or demanding anything. But that day, I mustered the courage to question the way she spoke to me. She reacted by ignoring me, and I realized that she was irritated. She did not threaten me or raise her voice. She simply looked at me very seriously and fell silent. I locked myself in my room and spent several hours not wanting to leave. After eating something in the kitchen, I went to bed, waiting for Saturday to come so I could see my mother. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to strange noises. At first, I thought perhaps a neighbor's dog had come in to rummage through the trash. But then I recognized my grandmother's cough. It was a deep, guttural cough that ended with a hoarse sound. I stayed in bed, wondering if I should go check on her. Despite my fear, I got up slowly, walked to the bedroom door, and opened it carefully. Then I saw my grandmother leaving for the backyard and moving a few meters away. I looked out the window and saw that she continued coughing, but the cough began to turn into grunts and howls that didn't sound human. I felt a terrible fear. Sometimes stray dogs make strange sounds, but this was coming from my grandmother. There was no doubt about it. It was impossible for a human being to make those noises without imitating something or experiencing extreme pain. I wanted to go to the backyard to ask if she was all right, but I saw her bending over as if her body were too heavy. Suddenly, everything fell silent. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps returning home. I ran back to my room and lay down on the bed. My heart pounded as I listened to the footsteps drawing nearer. After a short while, I heard the front door open. She entered, and I only heard her slow movements toward her room. After a few minutes, I took a deep breath and dared to go out. My grandmother, was in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her hand on her chest. She looked tired and in great pain. I asked if she was all right, and she simply said yes, and that I should go back to sleep. I remembered the stories some neighbors used to tell, saying that my grandmother could change her form and that, in the early hours, many believed they had seen her as a large dog roaming the streets. Over the months, I began to suspect that my grandmother still harbored a deep grudge against my father. I could tell by the way she spoke of him, even without mentioning him directly. My mother told me that my grandmother believed my father had bad intentions and that, over time, he might harm me or cause problems for the family. And, as they said, whatever my grandmother prophesied would come true. That's why they say she saw and felt something, a glimpse of the future, in which my mother would suffer greatly alongside my father. And that's why she became enraged and did everything to keep him away from our lives. I don't remember if my grandmother confessed that or if my mother found out some other way, but in the end, it became clear that my grandmother had cast an evil eye on my father. She was a very dangerous woman, as you may have noticed. So much so that I remember when she would take me to the market for shopping, and I would see neighbors blessing themselves as they passed by her. I never spoke to my mother about what I heard that night, or about that frightening cough. I felt that if I told her, she would become extremely worried and wouldn't be able to work properly. Besides, I feared that my grandmother would find out and feel betrayed, so I decided to keep secret what I saw that night. Years passed, and my grandmother passed away long ago. Today I'm 49 years old, have formed my own family, and everyone at home follows the stories on the channel. Thank you very much for everyone's attention, and good night.
Thank you very much for watching our video until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Have a haunted night, everyone, and see you next time.